This came up in conversation today with someone, and I thought it would be interesting to make a video about it. And the topic is why I didn't talk about awakening for 15 years after it happened for me. Specifically, no self-awakening, no self-realization. Why I pretty much... put it on the shelf. I didn't have any sense of needing to talk about it, didn't talk at all explicitly about it to anyone, and why that is. Because there are some interesting, I think, points to unpack in relation to that. So, yeah, this conversation this morning was just about sort of how this played out with me, my life overall, with my sort of conventional life and the awakening process, and then this essentially 15-year period where it was maybe almost like a dormant part of my life. The realization wasn't dormant, but the any activity in that space as a relative human was dormant. And the person I was talking to was also kind of relating their experience. But so there's some interesting points to this. The first thing I would say about it is it actually didn't cross my mind. When the realization of no self dawned, it wasn't, I've said all this before and I'll say it in the best way I can, but it wasn't special. It's not a special thing. It's not a special experience. It's not for anyone. The sense of the one who can relate to experiences or relate to a life, all of that was just gone. So there wasn't a one who felt special or arrived by that experience or by that shift. There wasn't a one that felt like it needed to propagate this, talk about this. All that was just gone. It was just obliterated. So what do you do, right? How do you move forward from there? Also, even saying, how do you move forward is a bit, is adding too much, because it really is a world of spontaneity, and you realize that there are ways of talking about behaviors and choices that may be helpful, but ultimately that's not what's happening anyway. So it was just, there's just no impetus. There was no sense of needing to talk about it or wanting to talk about it. There was certainly no sense of thinking anyone else needs it. There wasn't a sense of wanting to get validation from being a teacher. There wasn't a sense of wanting to be in a special position. There wasn't a sense of trying to use it as a profession or career. Those things just did not arise in my mind at all. And in fact, there wasn't YouTube back then, right? There wasn't social media. So it was much less common to just start talking about your life online or something. Also, there wasn't online Dharma really. There were satsangs that I didn't even know were occurring, but they were going on back then, but much smaller scale than what happens today. There were books on bookshelves in bookstores in the spiritual section, but you go into that section, you get a major mixture of all kinds of things, and most of it wasn't interesting to me. So there wasn't even a context for talking about this publicly or purveying this. I discerned a lot of this through reading a book, and I hadn't met a teacher, never met a realized human. So once it happened, there was just no impetus to talk about it. Didn't cross my mind, strangely enough. So I want to point out a couple of components that, although it didn't cross my mind, I didn't consider it or contemplate it. There are some components I think that do underlie that were part of the realization. One is that it was very obvious how easy it would be to mess it up talking about this, how easy it is to confuse people. I just knew that. And it's funny that I knew that because I hadn't, again, been exposed to other types of teachings, or I hadn't been moving in spiritual circles. Again, this was before social media or YouTube. I didn't know any of this that's readily available online. But somehow my instinct knew, and it really felt like kind of a little past lifey, which I won't go into. But this is very easy to mislead people about at various levels, and for different reasons at different levels of realization. And I knew there were different levels of realization at that point. It was obvious. So, or perhaps I could say different insights. The no self insight being like the culmination of all of the previous ones. So I knew that it was kind of like, why would I talk about that? Why would I want to go out and confuse people about this? And, maybe in 10 more lifetimes or something. I don't know. But that was more like an impression than a contemplation. It just, if you asked me, I would have said, well, no, I wouldn't do that. It's just too easy to mess it up. Another component is I knew through the realization itself and through the layers of identity that had to be essentially eradicated for the realization to dawn, the layers of conscious identity, which are not some metaphysical thing, and they're not a neurologic process that I'm talking about. It's actually a shared experience. It's very much a shared experience among humans. It's the way humans think about each other and think about themselves and talk about each other and talk about life and talk about being human and talk about spirituality. All of that, in one sense, it is the problem. It is the problem of mind identification. And that whole illusion doesn't want to wake up from itself. It doesn't want to see through itself. It doesn't really want no self. People, by and large, do not want to realize no self. There's nothing in it for them. It's that simple. Why would the ego want to eradicate itself? So yeah, I knew this isn't really, I knew what was realized, and it was as obvious as the sun shining directly in your face. It was also obvious that it's not a personal thing, of course. It's not just Angelo, so to speak, that is empty of self. It is everything and everyone that is empty of self. There's not even a container of a self. So the experience of self is a collective hypnosis that seems to culminate from a bunch of personal hypnoses. So it's very much a shared experience. It's very well reinforced. It's very well defended, even in spiritual circles. So from that degree of realization, it was kind of obvious, no one really wants this. Maybe not no one, but the vast majority of people are actually trying to avoid it. Let that register. The mental processes are actually trying to avoid the realization of no self all the time, all day long, all the thoughts, all the communications with other people. The vast majority of that's what it's doing, actually. And even, I would say, a large part of spirituality. Certainly the majority of spiritual circles and so forth, they're actually preserving that. Just listen to what people talk about. They're trying to preserve the self. So yeah, from that point of view, why would I talk about this? Why am I going to give you something that's going to take everything away, right? Who would want that? So there was that component as well. Now, understand, I want to be clear about this because that can sound really nihilistic or something. It's not nihilistic at all. And it can also sound, it can take the wind out of your spiritual sails, which I don't want to do because I think I love your spiritual selves. They're adorable. But I want to be clear that from this point of view, which it's impossible to talk about with language. It's not something it's not something I would ever give back. It's freedom, and it's awesome. It's just not awesome for anyone. It's not awesome for someone, and that's the big illusion. That's the big tamale when it comes to realization. Is what is that mechanism? Why is that mechanism? How does it feel to be stuck in the mechanism? How does it feel to be freed from it? So you can. You is a completely conventional term now. You can be free of that, and life goes on, and things continue to unfold and appear and disappear, and it's a very satisfying way to be and a very satisfying way to live. It's just not in the way you think you want it. It's that simple. The way you can receive what I just said and process it through the ego, it's not that. It's just not what you think it is. But so yeah, that seeking part of the personal ego, the personal mindset, the identity structure doesn't want what I'm talking about. And yet what I'm talking about turns out to be kind of awesome. So I want to be clear about that. Okay. That's another component of why I didn't talk about it. The third component, I think, this was clarified in this conversation this morning, but the third component, I think, is something like, in the absolute sense, the realization sense of things. It wasn't over. I don't want to say realization ends because it doesn't, but the path of realization, the path aspect, the waking up aspect, the wanting to end my personal suffering aspect, all of that does come to an end. Then you could say the Dharma propagates in a very different way. I'll say it that way for now. I don't want to get into that in this video, but yeah, in the absolute sense, it was seen through. The fundamental illusion was seen through. So it was kind of like nothing much to do in that spectrum anymore. And I guess instinctually, my feeling was, okay, well, what about the relative aspect? Yeah. So why not just develop myself in the relative aspect? So that's what I did. I decided to go to medical school and all of it. Again, not as much of a conscious choice as I'm talking about, but energetically it made total sense that it's like, okay, well, that's done. That's kind of over. I still meditated. There was still unfolding. There was a lot of vasanas being worked through. There was a lot of conditioning dissolving over time, and it doesn't end with no self-realization. So I don't think it does. But it wasn't a journey, and it wasn't a personal thing. It wasn't a personal issue. There was nothing to seek. All that was gone, right? So it's like, okay, well, develop myself in the relative, even though, yes, there's no actual world here, and none of this actually matters in any way that I could think about it mattering. Purpose, all these things are kind of very theoretical at this point. There's simply just what's happening, and whatever's happening is totally fine. It's totally okay. There aren't better and worse things and events and situations really in the absolute sense. But in the relative sense, it's like, why not do something that's like worthwhile, that I would enjoy? And actually, I had an instinct when I was a kid that I would be a doctor. I don't know why I kind of knew that when I was really young, and then I forgot about it. But I thought, well, why not? I have the work ethic now because I had been working in restaurant business, and it was a lot of hard work. So I kind of like, I have the work ethic. I'm smart enough, and I always liked science. It's a sort of healing art or whatever. It's a healing career, and I like that aspect of it. So I decided to go to medical school and just grind it out and work hard and did a couple residencies. So doing all of that actually did a lot of work. It did a lot of work, but it was work at the emotion level, work at the vasana level, work at the energetic level, and it what happens is it starts to play out spontaneously, really, is what happens with this. The shift goes from one that's a personal journey, a personal endeavor, all that. It turns to something that moves from spontaneity, because everything is spontaneous and there's no center. So everything moves from spontaneity, and that spontaneity took me right into that career and that work and all of it. So even through all that, there was no sense of like, ooh, someday I'm going to be a spiritual teacher. Like, if you would have told me that, I would have laughed. When I was in med school, someone knew that I was a meditator because I guess I had mentioned it, and I would go meditate at the Zen Center. And he said, oh, we're doing a mindfulness class with a bunch of med students, and can you teach a basic meditation? And I was like, no. Literally, I was like averse to it. I'm like, no, I don't feel qualified. So there you go. It was that degree of like not interest in spirituality, and I didn't really talk about it. Occasionally it would come up in a very random way, but for the most part, I didn't even talk about it at all, and it wasn't in my mind. It was, again, it's this, right? So I just did the work and sort of found a nice, I guess, niche in the relative world as a physician, and then a whole bunch of other stuff started happening. That was different. So life just kind of started, after no self-realization, life will just pluck you up and go, you think you're going to do this? No, actually, you're going to do this. And it moves you around to where you need to be for the continued unfolding of the realization. Up until that time, up until the no self-realization, I think efforting practice is valuable for sure. Intention, effort, orientation to discernment and insight, work in the spiritual endeavor is very important. But after that, it's just different. Like, it's still important. In fact, it's more important now, but it's not done by anybody. There's no path to it. It's life unfolding as it's going to, and there's a sort of genius level choreography to all of it. So it's rather beautiful. All right, enough talking about me. What's going on with you?